Reading from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2. This is the story of the visit of the wise men. Let's hear God's word. Now, in the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we have observed his star is rising, and we have come to pay him homage." Now, when King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all of the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea. For so it has been told by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star was to appear. And then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child. And when you have found him, bring me word, so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out. And there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. And when they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and they paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another way. The word of the Lord.
Praise be to God.
They were somewhere on Interstate 22, somewhere outside of Bethlehem in Pennsylvania. Somewhere Joseph was straining to see through the frosted window of their dying Chevy Nova. The snowstorm was worse now, much worse. The squeaking, scraping wipers barely made it back in time to tear the gluey flakes off of the windshield. Most of the time he found himself driving blind, surrounded by darkness, eyes straining to see down an icy stretch of cold, black road. Well, as much of the road as one headlight can illuminate. He glanced over at Mary sitting next to him. She was tucked deep into the seat. "You're all right, huh?" he asked for the 100th time. It was more a prayer than a question.
"Mm-hmm," she answered back. It was all she had the strength to say. Then she closed her eyes again and sank back into the freezing seat. She forced her mind to concentrate on the click whoosh of the wipers. She hoped she was reading all the signs wrong. She hoped the contractions would slow down, maybe go away. She hoped, but then she didn't know the first thing about having a baby. It was her first.
Joseph said, "When we get to Bethlehem, I'll find us a room real fast." And then he wiped the inside of the windshield with the palm of his calloused hand. The defroster had conked out. I mean, there's got to be something there that we can afford, right?
Something they could afford? Mary almost smiled. They couldn't afford anything. They had no money, no bank account, worst of all, no credit cards. She absolutely had no idea what they were going to do until Joseph got his first paycheck. Yeah. Nobody can hear me.
Sorry.
Sorry. No wonders. Speak again.
There you go.
Now I can. Okay.
Christmas miracle.
Something they could afford. no credit cards. She had absolutely no idea what they were going to do until Joseph got his first paycheck. She didn't even know what they were going to do and how to pay for the baby.
Joseph was beginning to show the strain. He was normally a reserved man, no wasted gestures, no movement without purpose. But now his face was flush red, and he anxiously blew on his hands, rubbing them hard on his pant legs. He absently fidgeted with dials and knobs on the dashboard. A dozen times he tried turning on the radio, even though he knew it had been broken for months. He felt like he was going to come out of his skin. He boiled with worry, guilt, and shame. How could he have dragged Mary out here in the freezing December, all because he couldn't seem to make things work for them back home?
Mary couldn't find the words to tell Joseph their first baby was fighting to get out, that the child they had waited for all this time was about to push headlong into the waiting world. Well, she hoped it was waiting anyway. What would Joseph do if he knew? Go to pieces in front of her? Fall apart completely? Mary was afraid of losing his strength altogether. Another contraction hit. It caught her breath. That one was closer, much closer. That was supposed to mean something, wasn't it?
Tired, huh? He said to her. Then he offered her a small smile of sympathy.
She smiled back. "Mm-hmm," she said for the 101st time. Mary and Joseph lived in Nazareth, a small town only about an hour out of Bethlehem. Well, only an hour when it wasn't snowing shovelfuls, and their ancient car wasn't stalling out every time Joseph hit the brakes.
Joseph was an unemployed carpenter who caught the odd non-union job whenever he could, mostly piecework and handyman jobs. That was what he was usually called for. Yesterday, a friend had called and offered Joseph a short-run job in Bethlehem. He could work through the end of December, maybe into January. When Joseph got the call, he joked with Mary about being a woodworker in Steeltown. But the pay was going to be good. God knew that they needed the money.
Another rush of pain shuddered through Mary, and she jolted away. They were creeping into downtown Bethlehem.
Joseph nursed the car into the parking lot of the first motel that he thought they might be able to afford. He looked over at Mary, smiled thinly, and got out.
She was going to have to town soon. She dropped her head back and slipped into half sleep. Somewhere in the cockney distance, she could hear Joseph's work boots crunching across the slushy gravel of the parking lot.
Just our luck, isn't it, Mary? He said as he slid into the frozen front seat, slamming the door shut behind him, gripped the icy thin ring of the steering wheel.
What happened? She said.
Conventions, he snapped. Conventions everywhere. Managers said the whole town's booked up. Bethlehem has been hit with out-of-towners. The Shriners, several weekend tax seminars, even a group from the Eastern Auctioneers Association was in town for the dozen farm foreclosures going on that week. In other words, no vacancies. Maybe there'll be something up in Allentown, he said. He let out a slow sigh, and he twisted the keys into the ignition. The car groaned and then roared back to life. He gunned the motor a few times, then eased the car back out into the chop of ice of the parking lot, out onto the interstate.
5 minutes later, Mary screamed.
Joseph hit the brakes. The car stalled and fishtailed off the road. "What is it?" he shouted in a panic. His heart was punching a hole in his chest. "Did I hit something?" he said.
"Joseph," she said in a thin whisper. "Joseph, I'm so sorry. It's the baby. It's time."
No, Mary, no," he shouted. His voice froze in his throat. Cold fear bolted through his body. "Why didn't you tell me while we were still in town?"
I thought I could make it."
He He snapped his hand out and cranked the keys. The car wheezed, it coughed, then it whined into silence. He could hear the quiet rustle of snow on the hood and Mary's rapid breathing.
Joseph, please do something, she whispered. Her voice sounded like it slipped out of thin air. Walston heard the car squeal off the road, then the slow moan of a dying engine. He could almost bet on the next sound he was going to hear, and he was right. The sound of footsteps crunching up the walkway to his farmhouse door. When he first heard the car, he thought it might be the bankman coming early. The letter he got in the mail 2 weeks ago said his farm would be gone by the morning of the 25th. That was tomorrow. It said the auctioneers would be there sometime before noon to remove him from the property. And now they may be coming a few hours early to price out the place, offer their appraisals. Well, Walston wasn't about to lose his last night with his family in the home they built, sitting on the land they watered with their own sweat. Then the knock came, rapid and urgent. Walston stood his shotgun up against the wall in plain view of the door. Then he cracked the door a little and looked out.
Please, you gotta help us! Joseph shouted as soon as he saw the sliver of a face through the door.
Walston stepped back away. This wasn't what he expected. Not at all. He had no idea what this man with the burning red face could want. Help you, Walston said. His voice sounded old to himself. I'm the one who needs help, buddy. You standing on a porch, I'm going to lose in the morning.
Oh, please, my wife's about to have a baby. She's over in my piece of junk car out in the snow.
Walston felt a charge of anger. Please, God, not this. This kind of thing was always happening to him. People taking advantage of his giving nature. Maybe that's what got him where he is now, a loser, a broke loser. He'd always been too soft. No, enough is enough. He'd seen his wife break down in the cornfield, heard his children crying in their beds. He did not need Mr. Charity Case standing on his porch. Not now. There is no room here, Walston said. My family's all asleep now anyways. Everything's taken. Why don't you try Harlan's place? It's 5 miles or so up the road.
Joseph pushed his palms up against the screen door. Don't do this to us, he shouted. She can't have her baby in the front seat. They'll both freeze.
Look, I don't even have a phone to call the doctor.
Doctor, you don't understand. She's having the baby now.
Walston stared at him. Hold on, he hissed through his teeth. He shut the door, stomped away, cursed under his breath. He knew the motel rooms were all taken back in town tonight. Still, he wasn't sure he would believe any story about a woman having a baby in a front seat. He'd fallen for one too many sob stories in his life. He made a decision, spun around on his heels and hiked through the house, collecting items. He came back to the door with a lantern, matches, a sheet, some blankets, and a pocket knife. Barnes around back, Walston said, jerking his head off to the left. That's all I got.
Barn, Joseph whispered. He felt his tears sting in his eyes.
A barn, Walston shot back. That's what I said, and that's what I got. Hay's clean, no snow inside, but you gotta be out by tomorrow. Everybody's gotta be out by tomorrow. Mary wrapped up Fern in one of the blankets against the barn wall, while Joseph kicked aside rocks, old hay, and manure. He worked fast. She watched his breath chug out in blasts of steam. He made a pile of fresh hay and drew a clean sheet over it, helped her to lie down. Her head dropped back against the hay as a spasm of pain twisted inside of her. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She could hear Joseph's ragged breathing pick up. Then she heard him whisper a terse prayer as he reached his hands down and slipped them under the baby's emerging head. Now the world will see God's face, Mary thought, as she grabbed a handful of straw and pushed with every coil of strength left inside of her. She opened her eyes, and old Olive sat in rafters, his huge eyes stared peaceably down at her. She started to weep.
Herb and his pals were unemployed steel mill workers, and one way or another, each had his own story to tell. They ended up on the streets. None of them had much of an education to speak of. None of them knew much except for mill work. Except they did know something about survival. They spent every day in that school. Herb and the others had been huddling around a heating duct in an alley off of Fields Avenue when the blinding light flared all around them. "Cops!" Herb shouted. Then a flurry of possessions were thrown into rusty carts and feet swiveling to retreat.
"Don't be afraid," a voice shouted at them.
The men froze in their tracks. None of them knew why exactly. Then they all turned and they squinted into the light. "Think the cops are trying something new on us?" Toothless Ernie whispered. "Nah," Herb shook his head. "That doesn't sound like Officer Kraminski to me." I like this voice." The others chorused in agreement, but Ernie didn't like it. "I'm for making a run," he said. "Let's give it his car a shove."
"I'm bringing you good news of great joy," the voice called out to them.
"Good news," Ernie hissed. "Must mean they got money to open the mission again." Another voice croaked in.
"Today in Bethlehem, the Savior has been born to you. He is Christ the Lord, and this is how you will know him. You will find the baby wrapped in sheets and lying in a manger."
"A manger?" Herb shouted back. "What do you mean? Like a barn or something? You gotta be kidding." But the light was gone. It took them all a minute to get the spots out of their eyes, and then they looked around and at one another. "A Savior born in a barn," Herb said. "What's that sound like to you boys?" "Sounds like my kind of Savior," Toothless Ernie grinned. And he cranked his cart around and was off, sliding sideways in the gray snow. "Wait, Ern!" Herb shouted. "We got nothing to bring the Savior." He turned to the other guys. Don't you think we should bring something to the Savior?
An hour before dawn, Walston let sleep take him. That was only after he paced himself into exhaustion, and his pounding heart decided that it had enough. At 9 on the nose, he heard a curt knock at the door. He thought it was a dream at first. By the second rap, he was on his feet and peeling the door open a crack. There they stood, 3 of them, immaculately dressed, slick, polished men, their faces pink from the freezing air. Behind them, 3 black Buicks were pinging in the cold. The men smiled almost in unison. Tiny wisps of frost curled out of their noses. Each of them thrust out official-looking documents as if they were a pass meant to get them inside. "You the bank men?" Walston asked, as if he didn't already know.
The men smiled.
"The ones from the east?"
"The Eastman Bank," one of them said, and they held out their documents even closer. Foreclosure notices, of course. "Are you Walston Pepper?"
Walston nodded.
The closest man to the door smiled. He held out his hand. I'm Mr. Golding, and that's Mr. Franken, and that's Mr. Muir."
Walston looked at Golding's hand. His rings caught the low sun and sparkled. Suppose you want to take a look around the place since you own it.
The bankman nodded and smiled again.
Wallston's family hid upstairs while he showed the men around the property. Golden, Franken, and Muir never spoke a word, only grunted now and then and waved their foreclosure notices like trespasses. They reached the barn. Wallston grabbed the cold handle. "You boys will be here for the auction at noon, I suppose," he said as he slung the rattling barn door open. He turned to them, waiting for their smile and nod routine. The men had their mouths open, faces white, knuckles red as they clutched the notices. That's when Wallston's knees went weak. He'd forgotten all about the crazy red man with the red face and his supposedly pregnant wife. Forgotten he'd given them blankets and supplies in his barn. Wallston turned to look inside. The man and the woman were staring at him. He caught and felt his breath catch. Then he noticed the small knot of street people surrounding them. They were all eating donuts. The boy went silent. Then Wallston heard it. Tiny, crackling breaths of a newborn. The child lay there wrapped in the old sheet. He'd even gave him the red-faced man the night before. They had scraped out one side of the barn and food troughs and made a crib out of it. Wallston's heart burned at the sight of this oddly comforting scene.
Herb stood up, pulled his tattered coat straight up around him, and stuck out a hand with fingers stained by chocolate glaze. "I'm Herb," he said. "The little guy over there? Oh, that's baby Jesus." Herb smiles. Sounds kind of Spanish, don't you think?
Wallston and the bankman watched the baby flail in the makeshift crib.
Finally, Herb cleared his throat. So you all come to see the baby like us? The angel told us about him last night. Toothless Ernie said through a jelly-filled mouthful. That's the gospel truth. Then Ernie's voice softened. He's the one we've been waiting for. That's the Savior there. That's Christ the Lord.
Wallston hadn't cried the whole time he was losing his home, but now he felt the tears come. Turning his eyes into icicles, another sudden quiet, then the baby coughed a breath and started to cry. He turned his head and opened his tiny red-pinched eyes.
And this will be a sign for you, Toothless Ernie whispered. You'll find a baby wrapped in linen cloths and lying in a manger. Listen to him wail, one of the other men said, adjusting his sheet. That one's going to be a preacher for sure. That's a voice that'll get heard. Mary smiled and nodded. The smile was small and sad.
That's it, Wallston thought. Nobody's going anywhere today. Not with the Savior here. No one's kicking anybody out into the street. Not if me and my shotgun have anything to say about it. Wallston spun around to have his say with the men from the eastern bank. But all that was left of them was the sound of their coats flapping in the wind as they bolted toward their Buicks. They left the foreclosure notices lying in the snow. Wallston watched the men fishtail out onto the interstate. Wise men, he said to himself. Wallston scooped up the notices and came into the breath-warm barn. He pulled the heavy door closed behind him and walked to the strange circle of street-stained people, quietly eating donuts and watching a baby cry.
Joseph looked up at Wallston. He grabbed Wallston's hand and he shook it, noticing how tired the man looked. But now, with an undisguised expression of peace in the turmoil, Joseph realized that he must look exactly the same way to Wallston. I'm Joseph, he said. Thank you.
Walston looked at Mary. She had strands of her hair stuck to her face, clinging bits of hay, evidence of the struggle, but she looked vibrant. The baby suddenly let out a small gasp and shot red curling fingers into the air. Walston laughed. He felt pieces of his pain slipping out into the air. He dropped to his knees on the cold ground and laid the notices down in front of the child. "Tell me about the angels," he said.
Toothless Ernie grinned and tore off half of his day-old donut and handed it to Alston. Some of the red jelly slipped down his palm. "See, that's the Savior there," Ernie whispered again. Let's stand as we're going to sing number 25.